Joining me now for reaction is Scott Uehlinger, a former CIA officer based in Russia, Stephen Yates, a former deputy assistant to Vice President Dick Cheney for National Security Affairs, and here in the studio, Matt Schlapp, chairman of the American Conservative Union. Matt, your reaction.
Yeah, I think what you said really captures it, which is the most important part of this is the policy. Should we be getting along with Putin's Russia? Absolutely. The idea that you have liberals almost calling for open warfare is absurd. By the same token, it's fair to criticize the president today. He had some errant answers. He gave some answers that are actually uncoupled from his own tough policy. And I think if we go back to what's important, looking at the policy, I think he's got it dead on right.
Scott, your time in Russia as a CIA officer, watching Vladimir Putin, you see he never really left the KGB behind. I mean, he is crafty. He's very canny, savvy, the way he answers questions, turns them around on the journalists and so forth. But what was your big takeaway from today, the media focusing on Trump's seeming to draw a moral equivalence between U.S. intel services and Putin's assurances?
Well, as you had said, Laura, the selective outrage of the liberal media is breathtaking to behold. They criticize President Trump almost as if he was sending $150 billion on a pallet to Iran, for example. But in fact, our policies directed against Russia are considerably stronger than they were a decade ago, and it's starting to tell. Another key point that perhaps you missed was that our present energy policy of exporting, increasing our exports of natural gas to Northern Europe is in fact undercutting Russian natural gas and hurting them where they live. It's depriving President Putin of the revenue he needs for mischief-making abroad. So our policies are working, and in this case, deeds speak stronger than the occasional gaffes of the U.S. president.
Yeah, Scott, I think if Donald Trump were up there and just started lobbing insults at Putin, I think that gives Putin a real PR victory at home, because he can go home and say, look, we've gotten so much under their skin. Look, I stood up to the president, and he doesn't. But you use that for your nationalistic ends at home.
That's right. Absolutely.
I lived in the Soviet Union in the old days in 1983 for a semester in college, and that was when Andropov was president. That was in the real dark days of the quickie presidential terms back then. But the idea that he's going to just lob insults at him, that is just ridiculous. It's unrealistic. We don't do that with President Xi. Obama didn't. And as far as I can tell, neither did Bush. We rolled out the red carpet, and China took 50 million of our personnel files during the Obama administration. I never even heard him talk about it.
That's right. And another thing to remember is that we have an unprecedented, incredibly biased press. Now, I can't imagine right now if there was at the Reykjavik summit with President Reagan and Gorbachev having a Western media that would be asking Reagan in front of the world's cameras to denounce the leader of, or in this case, Gorbachev as a liar to his face, because this shows that, the progressive mainstream media is more willing to grenade throw in the name of derailing Trump than it is in supporting any possible improvement in relations.
Let's get Stephen in on this. Stephen, when Ronald Reagan called the Soviet Union an evil empire, the left went crazy. You're saber rattling. They called him Ronnie Reagan. We're going to talk to Craig Shirley, biographer, shortly about this. They went nuts. They said Reagan was kicking the hornet's nest in the Soviet Union. We should get along with the Soviet Union. That was during the Cold War. Now we're post-Cold War. We still have challenges. But now they want to get tough on Russia. I'm howling at this, because for those of us who were around this town in the 80s, and if we worked in the Reagan administration, you couldn't get a break with the left on his dealings with the Soviet Union. But now they want to set up a shadow government. I want to play something for you, Stephen, for you to react to. This is Philip Mudd, former CIA man under Obama. Let's watch.
FBI director continues the investigation. Department of Justice continues support for the investigation. Congress continues saying that this investigation is legitimate. Curious point in American government. When do we see almost a shadow government come out and say, we cannot side with the government, whether it's the cabinet or the Senate? I think that's the big question.
Stephen, shadow government needs to form to apparently undo the presidential election. Your reaction?
Well, where's a former Obama CIA director calling treason when you need him? Because that's actually what that would be. And I think we've really run the limits on absolute Trump derangement syndrome across the board on how people react to this kind of thing. But really, I think the president was trying to do two hard things at one time today, and that might have been what's tripped up some of the communications. I agree completely on the strategy side of it that you got in the Angle. He's restoring realism, trying to get great power relations back on track, balancing one power against another to try to solve real problems. The proof of this is in results, not in instantaneous sound bites. But he's also the deal maker. He wants something now. And he's jumping in there, and I think the deal maker in him used some traits there in the presser that complicated what I think he's actually doing very well on the longer-term strategy.
Fascinating. Matt, this is what the media were saying today about what the intel chiefs should be doing here in the United States in reaction to what we saw in Helsinki. Let's watch.
President Trump basically said he believes Vladimir Putin over his intelligence community. Should the director of national intelligence, Dan Coats, resign in protest?
I think the right thing for Dan Coats to do would be to send a clear message and say he can no longer serve this president.
How does Gina Haspel stay on the job? How does Dan Coats stay on the job? He has now rebuked their professional assessment of Russia's role in meddling in the 2016 election.
Everyone's got to resign, apparently, because Trump had that press conference.
Because President Trump is doing what the previous administrations tried to do. Remember the reset button. Remember your clip about Medvedev saying, let's wait till after the election.
No, he went like this, Matt. He held Medvedev's hand. It was like this. Can you imagine if Trump, held Vladimir Putin's hand today?
I mean, this is what...
I will translate that to Vladimir later. Thank you very much,
when
Mr. President.
Other presidents try to start the relationship off on the right foot, they're called, warriors for peace. Donald Trump tries to do that, and he's called deranged, and people should... Look, I agree with you. He had some answers that were off the mark, but the policy is right, and the president needs to understand he's winning on this. Just stick to the course.
No, he's winning on it, and I think there are two things you can hold in your mind at the same time. Number one, having a better relationship with Russia. I heard Bill Richardson say that on TV today. We had Obama say it, Hillary say it. Bush said it. He drove around his pickup truck with Vladimir Putin. Remember that at Crawford?
He looked into his heart. Remember that?
And he saw his soul. So, Stephen, I think you could have those two thoughts in your mind. Better relationship with Russia, and also have a clear-eyed view of what Russia's complex history. They're very proud people. They love the motherland still. The glory days, they don't want them to be behind them, but their economy has shrunk. Their population is shrinking. They're, in many ways, on the decline. And they're not the threat that China is to us. I mean, their economy, what is it, half the size of California's? I mean, it's ridiculous.
Europe's economy dwarfs that of Russia at this point, and that's what made it even more laughable when we were having a discussion about NATO and whether European countries should pay their fair share. And I think, if Nixon can go to China during the Great Proletariat Cultural Revolution, when literally dozens and dozens of millions of Chinese people were killed by their own government.
60 million.
Yeah. And we can talk about geopolitics and real things that need to change in the world, because even more lives are at stake if we don't. That's what's going on. When you're talking about the nuclear stockpile, it's not just whether Russia uses it, it's whether Russia sells it and proliferates it. And so that's the stakes.
All right. A fascinating panel. Thank you all. Great perspectives.